when I was thinking about love and trying to write about love was that it's about responsibility. Like, we have to be responsible for each other. And I think that was the hardest thing for Xavier to get a grip on. Why does he have to be responsible for her? Why?
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
For those of you who haven't read it, this is How We Love. It's a brilliant book, I have to say. I'm not just saying that. I'm a huge fan of Lisa's, and this book in particular jabs at my heart in a deep way. I'm going to give you a little synopsis that's written by Lisa's publisher, House of Anansi Press. As the snowstorm of the century rages toward Newfoundland, 21-year-old Xavier is beaten and stabbed in a vicious attack. His mother, Jules, must fight her way through the shuttered streets of St. John's to reach the hospital where Xavier lies unconscious. When a video of the attack surfaces, Jules struggles to make sense of what she sees in the footage and what she can't quite make out. While Xavier's story unfolds, so do the stories that brought him there. Here, across families and generations, are stories of mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers, of children cared for, neglected, lost, and refound, of selfless generosity and reluctant debt. So that's, I think, a very accurate synopsis to give people sort of. Is there anything you would add to it?
I think this book is really about love, and in this moment that we're in, with war and pandemic and climate crisis, all of these things bearing down on us, I, while writing this book, was thinking about how do we fix this, and I believe it's about love, that we have to open our circles of love, who we love. Like, we have to move, even we love the people who are close to us, the people we already love, but we have to move wider. We have to love more, and we have to love, wantonly. So I think that's what I was trying to write from.
Well, that's interesting, and I think that's a beautiful thing for us all to strive for. But one of the things that really grabbed me about the book, and your writing in general, there's this plot that is extremely captivating in terms of what Xavier goes through. So Joe and Jules, the book opens with Joe and Jules in bed in Mexico, and they get a phone call that Xavier has been in a horrendous attack. And it's not a spoiler, it's the opening scene of the book. And the spine of the book and the plot carries the reader through that. But there's something deeper that happens. You have this ability as a writer where you take the reader on a journey through that plot, and without us knowing, we're subconsciously brought back through the century in this book, through people's backstories, through their intentions. And it's like this book is about this journey, but it's also about witnessing lives lived, an entire life loved. And I'm just curious, like, this book, their experiences, why this book, why these people, and why this story? What made you want to write about them?
Well, I think that violence in St. John's, in Newfoundland, particularly I would just say St. John's, has it's ramped up. And I think it has to do with the economic catastrophe that we're in. People can't afford will soon not be able to heat their homes anymore. I think people are struggling. I think that presses down on even young people. They feel it, and I wanted to think about what happened, why, because there have been a lot of stabbings in St. John's in the last decade or so. which is what happens to this young man, Xavier. He's stabbed and beaten up. And I wanted to think about what does that, like, I imagine in the book that kind of a incident happens very quickly. It's probably really adrenaline fueled, probably drug fueled. Like, what is it that allows someone to do that kind of thing, that extreme violence? And I do try to avoid violence when I'm writing but I felt like I had to address it. It was important to address it. And so I wanted to recognize how people get to that place, because it's not enough to just say that things are violent. I have to show, or I wanted to show, how someone beyond, being riled up at a party and drunk and stoned and angry and losing their temper and stabbing someone, what is the history of all that? How does a single person come to that? So the person who does the stabbing in this novel had a very precarious childhood, was not cared for by our institutions, by parents, just wasn't held up and taken care of. So that is the trajectory of that stabbing, but also, just the loss of that kind of care that we have to give children as a community, as a province, as a country, globally.
It's interesting because some of us, when we write about stories in Newfoundland, show very scenic pictures. Maybe my television show, Republic of Doyle, being one of those things where we showcase a certain element of our image. And you, in this book in particular, in many of your writings, but you don't shy away from the other side of that. And I don't mean you take advantage of it or you are in any way judgmental toward it, but you allow yourself and the reader to get into the bowels of what's not so pretty about it. And you touch on it in a number of ways throughout that. How much about place for you is what inspires you as a storyteller? Like, where does that fit in?
Well, it's everything to me.
That's good. Well, I'm glad I asked that one.
But I think, this book there's a very middle class, even upper middle class family, and people who are in a much more precarious state, especially young people. And I wanted to, and we have that in St. John's. We have very, very comfortable people. We have people who are really uncomfortable. And I wanted to look at that element of that city. And how do we care better for the people who are being left behind? And so I hope, and I'll ask you, Allan,
okay,
because you read it, do you think both those elements of society are equally portrayed?
Yeah, I mean, and I can step it out for you guys who you may or may not have read this. I don't know how many people have read the book yet. But there is a family that I want to talk a little more about, because you glossed over when I asked you about these people. Why now? You haven't even talked about these people in the family. And I'll come back to that in a second. There's this wonderful family that's complicated and has this glorious backstory and are truly, truly the essence of St. John's. And being a person who's live in St. John's, I've gone through the downtown St. John's experience. I think you capture it in such a beautiful way that I felt nostalgic for every moment that I didn't recognize in my life that is now past. It was extremely emotional, and I feel like you nailed that. And then the connection between that and there's a young girl, later a young woman in the book, who's going through the foster care system, and her backstory, how she got there, her mother's story, her father's story. You stepped that out, and of course Bradley Murphy, like the sweetest name, who is one of the roughest characters in this book. I feel like they're all captured very equally, but you're not shying away from it, and I mean you're shining light on it. But even in the alleyway, like there's a scene in the alleyway where a character is potentially being tricked into some kind of violence or experiencing violence. Like, it's all over the book. And I mean, that clearly is important to you, to expose that or to shine a light on it.
Because I see it. Because I live right in downtown St. John's, and so I see it everywhere. I've done a lot of work with young people who are wards of the state, and I've seen what happens when, you know, certain things are like just ordinary things, like being able to go to school, being able to eat, being able to transport yourself around the city are taken away, and just how like one little thing, like losing your bus pass, unravels a whole life. Like just like that, you can't get to school, or you can't, if you have a curfew with the courts, you can't get back to the curfew. But I think I understand your first question better now. You really want to know who these people are, really.
Well, if I can confess something, almost everything I read of yours, very often the protagonist is you. So, you know, and Jules is no exception. I could not see you living in that house with that family. I just felt like it's so much a part of you. And I don't claim to know you brilliantly. I like to think I know you a little bit, but that's just how it's always been for me. Even before I met you, I feel like you write yourself so deeply in it and everything around you. Is that true? Would you see it that way?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think this book is perhaps the most autobiographical thing I've ever written. Recently, my mother-in-law died, and she was a great storyteller, and I wanted to capture her stories. I wanted them in the book. I wanted to make sure they didn't disappear with her. Jules is a painter, an artist. I paint. But is she me, though?
I don't know. I don't mean literally.
No.
I'm not trying to. This is not Ricky Lake. I'm not trying to get you to.
No, but you know, like it's a really good question,
Right.
Even for myself here on the stage.
Yeah.
Is this me? No, I think it is and it isn't. But I do know that many of the stories, and many of them are completely made up.
Yeah.
Like for instance, my son has never been stabbed or beaten up. And I said to him...
It's very good to hear, by the way.
Yeah, I said to him, I've written a book. There is someone who seems to be like me, that she has a son. And he's like, okay. And I said, you know, this is, he said, did you write my social insurance number? Like, just tell me that. Just tell me that much. My phone number. Is my phone number in the book? I said, no. And I said, but I mean, it's not you, I said, of course, and it isn't, but you do get stabbed and kicked in the head and beaten up. He's like, oh my God, okay, what else? But what is in it, really, about it is not my son in any way, really, but except the love, like the way a mother feels about a son, which is different than, I mean, not in intensity, but, you know, there are differences between sons and daughters, the kinds of things that happen, not in intensity. I love all my children equally, for the record. Equally children. But yeah, I think there's a real truth, or I at least was struggling to get a real truth down about that kind of relationship. And also in the book, it is about mothers, but it's important to me that recognizing that I don't think that everybody has to be a mother, of course, but I do think we all have to love children, just like we all have to love old people. We all have to, like we can't just, and I think we all do. We all have children moving through our lives all the time in one way or another.
Right. And when you do focus a little bit on the foster care side of our society, and you were talking with me earlier about it was very important for you to be able to show the different levels of economic inequality between people, and bring that in. But you do capture all that while taking us on this mystery. You know, it's no small feat. And I'm curious, like, about your process as a writer. Do you start? First of all, I'm assuming you wrote this during the pandemic, when not that the pandemic's over, but while the lockdown was happening, a lot of people were doing a lot of things. A lot of people couldn't pull off getting out of bed, and a lot of people, you wrote this wonderful book, which may be your greatest book yet. Like, what drove you? How do you break these things out? What was the kernel of inspiration to do that for you?
Well, I mean, I get up at 5. It was a lot longer than the pandemic to write this book. It took a long time, and I guess I write every day, and cast stuff away and rewrite it, and I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work then, and it's intense. And then I thankfully have a very fantastic editor in Melanie Little, and she's so gentle and sweet, but she just crosses the bad stuff out for me, and she's a mastermind at composition. So, like, she'll say, if you just move this scene over here, it clicks together much better. So, yeah, I think I was driven by the pain that I was seeing in the city, like, in the newspaper, everywhere, in the people that I knew who were pretty poor and pretty young and struggling, but also the joy that you see, which maybe in times like a pandemic, besides being, really lost and confused and afraid, to the extreme, maybe the dial for joy is also ramped up on the other side. And maybe we feel bursts of joy that are just as intense as the pain we've been going through.
That's awesome. And it's also really interesting that Snowmageddon, for those of you who don't know what Snowmageddon was, it was like this epic snowstorm right before the pandemic kind of took over the world. We had this 5-day, 280 centimeter or more snowstorm, and we were all trapped. And the stories that were coming out from that were all these beautiful, glowing, we're all helping each other. Yet you set this entire tragedy essentially within the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like, why was that
Why
important?
ruin the pandemic?
Yeah, you're the only one.
Snowmageddon.
Snowmageddon. Yeah.
Yeah, because there was a story on Facebook about a city councillor, some woman who was feeding her baby, had run out of formula, and there was no formula. The supermarkets were all closed. You couldn't get it. And one city councillor brought this woman her own breast milk to feed the baby. There were stories of this group of people who call themselves snow angels, and they went around knocking on doors, shoveling people out, bringing food. It was that amazing time. But I had someone in hospital, actually, in the midst of it.
Oh.
And you couldn't go to a hospital, but I went to St. Clair's, which there was a plowed avenue to get to St. Clair's. You weren't allowed in. The whole place was locked up, but I went around the back and banged on the door, and this nurse let me in, even though she's kind of said, you're not supposed to be here. And it was all nurses who were staying for 36 hours, like longer than that, longer shifts. And it was a very airy, but uplifting place to be, to see people, these nurses caring for patients who were trapped, who couldn't get their family, couldn't have anybody come to them. And I think that's why it's then. Because I just remember, I thought when the first time I left my house to get to the hospital, I really thought I was going to be buried alive by a plow or fall into a snowbank that I couldn't get out of. Like, the snow was up to the roofs of houses, and people came out of their second-story windows and kind of tobogganed down on their bums to get out of the houses. And it was dangerous. It was dangerous walking there, and I remembered talking to my husband on the phone saying, yeah, I'm getting close now. I think I'm going to make it. And it was, so that's why.
That scene's literally in the book, by the way.
Yeah.
So what's your husband think about that scene? How much of Joe is in your...
Yes, he wants to know that as well.
Well, he's probably going to see this, so you can answer right now.
He's read it.
Yeah.
He had to. He
Yeah, too.
He said, do you think people are going to think this is me? I'm like, yeah. But it's a nice portrait, don't you think?
Oh, he's a wonderful man. They're truly wonderful people. We're talking about all this darkness and all of this inequality and all of this violence, and the violence is brutal in that scene, but the book is hilarious. Like, it's the scene you're referring to, while not you, is walking up the road, not talking to your husband. You get hit with some poor dude is out with a snow blower. It turns out he's snow blowing out his, like, a mother who's been trapped in the house for 5 days, and not your character. Jules just starts screaming at him because Jules gets hit in the face with the snow, and the fact that her son is in the hospital in critical condition. And the other wonderful part of the book is that they were in Mexico at the beginning of this tragedy, and there's only one flight ticket home because of this impending storm. So sorry, I'll stop with the you thing. That is an accident. Jules and Joe decide that Jules should be the one to come home. So Joe is trapped, and there's his isolation, being separated from the rest of this experience with Jules and his family is, like, also extremely devastating and hilarious at times. I think you have a section of the book that we were talking about you reading. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, I will.
Set it up. I think it's better for you to set it up.
I will, yeah.
I'll jump in because I love the scene.
You tell me anything that I leave out,
all right.
Okay, for people to understand who haven't read the book. So there's a young woman. Her name is Trinity. She and Xavier, the young man, they were childhood friends. And Xavier's mother, Jules, cares for this kid who's a foster child, lives across the street, loves this kid. And but she falls into a lot of trouble, and she gets involved with drugs, and she ends up in this big downtown house where Xavier happens to be renting a room, and she is also renting a room. And her boyfriend is abusive, and he's left her, but she kind of stays away from him. She stays in her room, but he comes home late at night. His girlfriend, who he's madly in love with, is still downtown at a party, and she calls him into her room. Trinity says, you have to come in here. And she is in agony. Some kind of terrible pain is happening to her. He doesn't know what's wrong with her. He can see that it's life or death. And he calls an ambulance, and he's absolutely terrified and doesn't want to be involved, but is forced to be. Finally, the medics arrive, the paramedics and the ambulance, and he knows one of them. And it's this guy who was in playing basketball when they were kids in junior high, and he was like a basketball star, and he thinks, this guy will save me from this awful situation and fix everything. And then gradually, as he's talking to him, he remembers that the guy is like a jerk. So this is what's happening. What the hell is wrong with her? Xavier asked the two paramedics at her side. And the guys that he knew, his name is Colin Mercer. He said, "What the hell is wrong with her?" Xavier asked the two paramedics at her side. He had determined that though Colin might have been reformed personality-wise, there was no chance he had the sensitivity required to diagnose a demonic possession or even a hangnail. He had always been, except for his ability to get a ball in a hoop when required, a total idiot. "She's having a baby," one of the paramedics said. "I'm not," Trinity said. "I got an appendicitis, a burst appendix." The paramedics didn't say anything more. They were working in silence now. "I had my period," she said, but she sounded uncertain. I have a bit of weight on, that's all." "You're in labor," the paramedic said. "Can you walk? We just need to get you down the stairs." Her whole face crunched together then, and she made fists, pressed them into her eyes, and when she took them away, she said, "Xavier, you're coming in the ambulance." If he's not related," Colin said. There was a flush in Colin's face, and he was determined to save Xavier, determined because of that moment during the basketball game when they were in junior high, or maybe because of a new solidarity of young men everywhere and how important it was for them to turn their backs on this kind of situation, turn together so they could get a little further ahead and maybe come out on top, even though that was looking less and less possible for them. Or maybe Colin Mercer felt some loyalty to the code of being a paramedic. There were rules, and Merce was a rule follower, and it had worked out for him, and he wasn't going to abandon that regime now. And though following the rules had never worked out for Xavier, and anything good that had ever happened to him was because he had broken some rule or other, and he had faith in breaking every rule he could, he was willing for this moment to be a convert. He would follow the rules Merce believed in because maybe there really was some higher order, an arrangement of society whereby if everybody agreed to follow the rules, they would all benefit. And what the fuck, a baby? Merce didn't know anything and had been clear to Xavier, even out on the basketball court. Merce didn't question anything. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. Colin Mercer and with Colin Mercer. And Xavier said a little prayer, something he had learned from his nanny Florence, that of course he didn't believe in, and he had been right not to believe in, because was this the best God could do? Colin Mercer was the best the universe could spit out at this hour of need? But he said the prayer anyway in his head. It was the Our Father, the only prayer he knew, and what it meant was, I will obey. Then they maneuvered Trinity down the front steps to the sidewalk, and it was really snowing hard now. She had stopped talking. She was caught in another spasm. One of the medics was telling her to breathe. Xavier was squashing his boots on and almost tripping out the door. They already had her loaded into the back, and the neighbors' lights were coming on all down the street because of the ambulance. "Are you related to her?" Colin asked him again. It struck Xavier that everything had been easy for Colin his whole life. They had a big house with rose bushes along the fence, white roses that dropped petals all over the sidewalk, an honest-to-God picket fence that came to the knees. And what the hell was that? Like the idea of a picket fence? And Xavier had grown up much the same way, he realized. but he had not turned out like Colin Mercer. There but for the grace of God, his mother had said all the time, and she meant it could have happened to him, whatever the horrible thing was that had befallen someone in the paper, or someone struck down by illness, or a woman whose husband had left her. Those things might have happened to him, except fate had intervened. He had parents who loved him, and a sister who mostly loved him, but held him to account. God, he had everything, just like Mercer, but some hidden splinter of grace that had worked its way into his soul, or heart, or kneecap, wherever. He was not a jerk. She's related, Xavier said. You just said you weren't related, Colin Mercer said. Get in, the other medic said. I'm her brother, Xavier said. The other medic had gone around to the driver's side. He told Xavier to get in the back. Fuck off, Mercer said. She grew up in foster care. Everybody knows that. She's not related to you. Just get in the back, the driver said. They had turned on the sirens and the lights. I'm her brother, Xavier said, but he was already in the back. Thank you. Thank you.
That's awesome. I think the obviously there are a number of very important relationships throughout the book, but I think the what's the second chapter called? His 2 stars or this is great interviewing, Allan.
Yes, 2 stars.
yeah.
You're right.
But the relationship between Xavier and Trinity, which is the best name too, like their dynamic and their destiny toward each other. Just can you talk to me a little bit about what that was, or what that is, or what you feel it is?
So it is, well, spoiler alert, it is Trinity's boyfriend who attacks Xavier. So they are bound together in peculiar ways, the 3 of them, as is the mother and the 2 children. So there are Trinities throughout. But I think one of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about love and trying to write about love was that it's about responsibility. Like, we have to be responsible for each other. And I think that was the hardest thing for Xavier to get a grip on. Why does he have to be responsible for her? Why? Because his mother likes her, or because he happened to, she lived across the street when they were children, but in that moment, I think it comes to him that some things we just don't have a choice about. And that we have to love people. We just have to. It's our responsibility. And so I was really, like, it's not a very sexy or joyous thought that love actually is responsibility, guys. So, but it is kind of beautiful too. Like if we, because I think it's pleasurable, actually. I think it's pleasurable in ways that we don't expect to take care of people when we allow ourselves to do it.
And it's a hard thing for a kid to have to face, that responsibility, because they meet each other at such a young age. And I don't know if I should say too much about how we meet Trinity, because the scene is stepped out so beautifully and so heartbreakingly that, and hilariously, as many of them are, but they are connected immediately and they become the same person. And there's no part of them together that I feel anything romantic until that scene.
No, they are. This scene?
Just before, there's something about him, whatever's happening inside him, it's not romantic, but it's a love that he's trying to deal with that
Yes.
It's just very cool.
I think we've all had these relationships where when you're very young, like they were very young, there's a kind of intensity that children have in friendships that is, it's like electricity, and it's really, really intense. And then it can dissolve, and that's what happened to them. Like they move away, they're separated from each other, but when they come back together, I think, because she moves to Toronto. I'm looking at Alan because it is Toronto, right? I'm trying to remember.
Oh my God, it's like we're adapting Cod all over again.
Yeah. So she moves, but she comes back, and the friendship ignites, even though I'm not sure that it's what he would have chosen.